Hello, welcome to 2021. This is the God with Us podcast, where we are exploring the intersection of God's presence and purposes in everyday life. And today we're going to be talking about expectation or expectancy, question mark. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, Sid and I rolled out of bed, both wearing black shirts and gray sweaters. But it's cold in our house. And, I guess being married for 20 plus years, almost 21 years, you just start matching. But Sid, where are we in the Ignatian spiritual practices, the Ignatian exercises, which is kind of the basis for season 2 here on the God with Us podcast? And then let's jump into our topic.
Yes. So first of all, if you haven't been with us yet, Ignatian spiritual exercises are really cool because they encourage you to read scripture in an imaginative kind of way, sort of reading the narratives and the stories that we're given, but reading them with also allowing our imaginations to sort of ponder and contemplate what it might have been like to be part of the biblical story or to be one of the characters in the story. And we've been, we're sort of finishing, it's divided into 4 weeks because it was originally intended to be a 30-day retreat where you stop all of your ordinary life and you go away for 30 days. But we are doing the version where you do it as part of your normal life. And so we're in the second week now, but that doesn't actually mean literal weeks for us.
Let's call it the second part.
All right. So the second part is being with Jesus on mission. And so it's really like a school of discipleship. You're spending time in all the narratives about Jesus and really paying attention to what Jesus says and does and who he spends time with. But you're also noticing what Jesus doesn't say and what he doesn't do and who he doesn't spend time with. And the idea is that through really spending time getting to know Jesus, that we would know him better, and that as in knowing him better, we would love him more deeply. And in loving him more deeply, we would be wanting to follow him more closely. So that's sort of to know him more intimately, to love him more deeply, and to follow him more closely is sort of the way I do it. To know him more intimately, to love him more intensely, and to follow him more intentionally. Because
alliteration strike back. I love it, actually. So we'll just put a pin in this for another podcast. But just looking at those 3 things and why they're grouped in the way they are is really interesting to me. But that'll be for another time. So this week, or the second part that we're in, is focusing all about living with Jesus and knowing him and following him more closely.
Right. And so it starts with the incarnation. And part of the contemplation that you're doing with the incarnation is noticing all of the people surrounding, before Jesus was born. So paying attention to the visitation of the angel to Zechariah in the temple, the angel visitations in the dreams of Joseph, the angel visitation to Mary and Elizabeth getting together and celebrating their pregnancies. So you're spending a lot of time because you get to know like when I wanted to get to know you, part of it is like, tell me about your family. I meet your family. I learn more about who you are because now I know more about your family. And so part of contemplating the incarnation is getting to know the people the family that Jesus is born into and the community that Jesus is born into.
I thought that when you wanted to get to know me, you just pretended like you wanted to learn guitar.
Well, I did do that too.
So as we have closed the book on the year 2020, the unprecedented year, as many people have said.
And the year of the pivot.
And as we are moving into 2021, there's a lot that can be learned from the time of Advent and Christmas and the people who were living with great expectations or expectancy. And so this is kind of the shift between those 2 words is something that you've been contemplating quite a bit in relation to Zechariah, especially. So why don't you walk us through some of those things that you've been wondering about, and then we'll kind of talk about a little neuroscience stuff because I can't help myself. And then
and just as a side note,
wrap it up.
Yeah. as a side note too, I want to like sort of say that the beginning of me thinking about this concept was actually from doing this transformational coaching course that I do with John Hand and Tracy Lynn Burt and Greg Langman, which we can put a link in the comments or something. Or is it too late to do that?
No, we'll do it.
All right, we'll do it. So that
show notes is the technical. I'm
yes,
still
okay.
trying to get Sid
show notes
up to speed on all the
show
babble.
notes.
So the show notes.
So in the transformational coaching course that we talk about postures, and the last of the postures that we talk about is having a posture of expectancy rather than expectation. And so that's sort of where I started thinking about, well, it's part of where I started thinking about this. But then also in contemplating the story of Zechariah, we're looking at Luke chapter 1 here. And we find Zechariah in the temple going about his ordinary service as a priest, where his name has come up for temple service. And so he's in the temple and he is actually offering the incense offering. And if we think a little bit about the background of Zechariah, we learn right away that he and Elizabeth are very faithful. They have always been keepers of the law. They're found to be righteous. But we also find out that they are barren, that they haven't been able to have children, which immediately signals us or makes me, when I read that, think immediately of Abram and Sarah, and thinking like, the beginning of the nation of Israel came out of barrenness. And now here we have again that the beginning of a new thing is coming out of barrenness. So that signals me as the reader right away, oh, this sounds familiar. But we also find that Zechariah, as he's offering the incense offering, he's visited by an angel, the angel Gabriel, no less, who comes and tells him that his prayers have been heard and that he and his wife are going to bear a son. And then you have this sort of record scratch moment where Zechariah's like, how will I know this is going to be true? I'm an old man, which... at first read, and I've read this, I remember reading this story as in my younger days too, of just sort of like, what? Like, how can you question when an angel is standing right in front of you and saying that this is going to happen? And then you ask the question, how will I know that this is true? Like, how often do you get visited by angels in the temple while offering the
just
prayers?
Caught off guard.
Right. So that leads you to think more about like, what kind of place does Zechariah have to be in order to not be noticing or believing that God is visiting him and saying that these things come true. So as I contemplated that, it's like, well, here's this old man and his old wife who have probably been praying for a child for years and years and years. And we could call that maybe an expectation.
That it hadn't been fulfilled.
An expectation that hadn't been fulfilled, but an expectation that like the thing to do is you get married, you have children, and when the children don't come, it's an unmet expectation. And so as they longed for this child and probably prayed for years and years and years, I wonder if at this point, Zechariah has given up. If he's an old man and he says, well, that's just an unmet expectation. I'm never going to have a child. It's just the way it is. And I wonder if that unmet expectation and that sort of giving up on praying for a child didn't also maybe carry over into just his sort of giving up on any expectation of God showing up in his life or of the Messiah coming in his lifetime and all of those kinds of things that would be connected to that. But if he just finds himself in this place where he's just not really expecting anything, he's doing his temple service, but he's not really expecting to meet with God, even though the temple is the place of God's presence. He's just not expecting to meet with God. So that when the angel shows up, he's so startled and so like taken off guard because he wasn't expecting God to be in the place where God is supposed to dwell, which is kind of an odd thing for a priest, right?
Well, and I think the lesson for us is that we can be faithful and we can do the things we're supposed to do. So he'd been serving, he'd been living his life. And yet so often, because of expectations that haven't been met, the things that have been going on lose kind of their flavor or their value. And we just kind of like slip into just going through the motions.
Right. Yeah. And so if we talk a little bit more about expectation and expectancy, we talk like the idea of an expectation is concrete and it's specific. It's like you're expecting a certain result. So for example, the expectation that they would have children, or the expectation that like When you ask me to show up on time for a conversation that we're supposed to have, you expect me to show up. And if I don't show up, and if I'm not there, or if I'm distracted and doing something else, then there's this sort of feeling of like, oh, like an unmet expectation, right?
Mhm.
But expectancy is more like just expecting something good. So for an example of this is like a wrapped Christmas present under the tree. You have an expectancy that it's going to be something good. Somebody thought of you, somebody wanted to give you a gift, but you don't know what's in the present. You don't know
Right.
exactly what it is, but you know it will be something good. And so there's the expectancy of, oh, there's going to be something good in here. And so that difference between the expectation of, I want this specific thing in this specific way at this specific time, versus the expectancy of, God's going to show up. Good
Mhm.
things are going to happen. And God is always doing something new.
Right. Well, based off of this conversation that we had a little bit ago, I wrote out some thoughts on the differences between expectation and expectancy. So I want to bounce this off you and see if this
Okay.
is capturing
Because I didn't actually
the
read your blog
essence.
post.
That's okay. So an expectation is open to the unknown, but expectations are closed to the unknown. It likes to know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
So
that fits.
So a Christmas gift, you're full of expectancy when you don't know what it is. But if you're like a kid who clearly like wrote out to his parents what he wanted for Christmas, then you kind of have an expectation of what's in that box.
That's very true.
And if you don't get what you expected, how do you
If
feel?
you got something that wasn't on the list,
Then how do you feel?
you feel disappointed.
You feel disappointed. You're not grateful for what you did get. You're disappointed for what you didn't get. So expectancy is open to the unknown, whereas expectations are more closed. So expectancy has more of like a passionate desire, but I think expectations, they really do have a secret kind of demand. Like you're kind of demanding that life would conform to your expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether it's conscious or not, there is that sort of like, this is what I want to see happen, and if that doesn't happen, then yeah.
So expectancy would be more just preparing and then being open to what happens.
A longing.
And expectations it's not just preparing; it's more like planning. Like you are going to plan what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So then the last one is expectancy. Means you're open to cooperating with what happens. So, which is not what Zechariah did. He wasn't cooperating with what's happening with the angel. He's freaking out, right? And so instead of cooperating with, you kind of want control over the situation. You're trying to manage and control the situation. So does that capture some of the differences between expectancy and expectation?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. The especially the known versus the unknown.
So then as we move into the second part, or the second week for the Ignatian exercises, do we have expectations for what Jesus is like? Do we spend our lives with kind of expectations of how Jesus will act as we read the Bible? Do we often expect and feel like we already know the story? Or for all of us, do we have an expectancy that Jesus won't fit into our predictions?
And that maybe we'll discover something new about him that we haven't known before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, exactly. So what might that mean for you, Sid, for moving into this new year? We've closed the book on 2020. We're moving into 2021. And I don't even know if you're prepared for this, but what might be ways of living in expectancy in a new year rather than being full of expectations?
Yeah, well,
You're going to get the best of Sid Holtzclaw now, because I just asked her a question she didn't prepare for. So here we go.
Well, what I'm hoping to do this year is to set my expectancy on a daily basis of expecting to see good things, new things, to expect God to be at work, and to just ask every morning that God would open my eyes and help me to see. So it's sort of like, we've talked about this before, like if you're looking to buy a new car and you're looking at a particular model, you may not have ever noticed that car on the street before, but now that you're looking for it, suddenly it's showing up everywhere. It's in every parking lot. It's on every trip that you take anywhere. And so in that same way, I want to be looking for God to be at work That's something, I've tried to do in the past. It's something I try to do, but I'm trying to be super intentional about it this year, about like the expectancy of God is at work and God is showing up. And if I have my eyes open and expect to see him, then I will see him, and I won't be so caught off guard and be like, how will I know? I'm old. I don't know. How are you going to live expectantly? With expectancy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is. As a church, we're going through the Gospel of Mark for the next 3 months, and so which I love that gospel, and I've done a lot of studying, and so there is this kind of like, I want to remain open to Jesus, through the Gospel of Mark, and then see how that can, what are the things he'll be calling me into. The next kind of exercises we'll be going through is exactly the call of Jesus the King over our life. And so that'll probably be the theme of our podcast next week. So just being open and obedient to the unexpected call, and being open to the unknown places that Jesus will be leading us this next year. And I think this is a good call for all of us this new year, where we have the sense of, can we just get back to normal, and the vaccines will roll out and we'll get back to normal, and the world and the economy,
which is an expectation,
open up and we'll get back to normal, and that's an expectation. But can we receive with expectancy the new ways, the new rhythms, the new purposes with our neighbors, with our friends, with our family, with our jobs, with our churches, with mission? Can we receive those things in an open-handed way, not trying to control them, or not trying to just to soothe our own anxieties, but just to rather move forward? Our brains are prediction machines, as we've been talking about in the past, that we take what we've learned in the past and we project it into the future as a way of surviving, of managing anxieties, of overcoming fears, or sometimes that causes more fear. But instead of taking that prediction machine, God is calling us into rest, which is the posture that we have in God's presence. But he's also calling us into a work, which is pursuing God's purposes in the world. But can we do that without expectations? Presence and purpose as a form of expectancy, rather than presence and purpose as a demand or something like that.
Yeah. So can we enter 2021 with curiosity, sort of watching and waiting? And actually, I'm going to share this too. I was just on a prayer call this morning with Margaret from our church,
Vineyard North.
Yeah, and she's been having a picture lately of when she was a kid. She used to ride horses, and sometimes, when you're sitting in the saddle with the bit and bridle, you have total control over where the horse goes. But she said that she also, and I don't know if it was her friends or her siblings, would also ride horses without saddles, without bits and bridles, just hanging onto the mane. And she said that when you're riding a horse that way, you have very little control. The horse goes where it wants, and you just have to hang on and go with it. And she was getting that image for 2021, that like, can we be with God in such a way that we're hanging on to the mane and going where he goes without trying to control and turn and, coerce God into doing what we want him to do. So I just thought that was a really cool image. And I love that idea of that curiosity and that freedom of what will God do next? How can I hang on and go with it?
That reminded me of the C.S. Lewis Narnia example of Aslan the lion, and one of the kids asks, "Is that a safe lion?" And another person answers, "No, he's not safe, but he's good."
Yeah.
And so can we believe in the goodness of God, but not play it safe? Did I say that?
It may have been tame instead of safe, but you know what? It's the same idea. So.
There we go. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us for the God With Us podcast. We are on Spotify. We're on YouTube also, so then you can see our matching outfits on accident. We are on iTunes and all the other places, so please like and subscribe wherever you might find us, and throw comments or topics or questions, because we'd love to engage all of you too. So thank you so much. Any last words?
No, just hopefully we're not going to disappoint your expectations that we'll actually come back again next week. We haven't been super consistent.
Of expectancy that we will do a weekly podcast.
So join us in that expectancy without expectation.
Amen. We will talk with you all next time.